Welcome, and thanks for joining us for our Workday Chats today. I'm Annette Malati, and your host for today's Workday Chats. If you have any questions, please share them in the comments below. Today, we're going to be chatting about ways finance can bring value to your business in the midst of a dynamic and ever-changing environment, while simultaneously doing their day job. So, and also how they can be proactive, enabling them and their organization to operate at a speed and scale in the near term to really minimize disruption. So I've invited two guests here today to weigh in on this changing world of finance topic. So Rob Zwiebach, Vice President Product Management at the financial management product line at Workday, and Nick Aracco, the CEO of Achieve Next, and who published the CFO sentiment study that we'll be referencing today. Thank you both, and welcome for joining the discussion today.
Thank you, Annette.
Thank you.
So if we think about all the research that's been generated around what finance should focus on and what finance should look like in 2020, we've seen content around everything from becoming a data-driven organization, what technology should I invest in order to create more efficiency, how do I ensure I have the right talent, the list goes on and on. But no one could have predicted where we are today and how rapidly a seismic shift can arise. But here we are, and finance is now face-to-face with a reality that requires reacting quickly and effectively. I think we'd all agree that the most important thing for the long-term survival of any company is its ability to manage the unexpected, which is, in my opinion, it's all about being agile. So, Nick, you recently published the 2020 mandate, maximizing the performance and value of your most critical asset, people. The study offered some perspectives on how respondents plan to drive growth and performance in their enterprises when faced with a modest risk of recession, escalating talent shortages, as well as increasing technology-driven disruptions. Can you start us off with your perspective on the role of finance in leading the business through unparalleled disruption, and how your perspective may have changed given the state of things today?
Sure, Annette, and thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to bring to light the perspectives from a diverse and deep mix of finance leaders who contribute their voices, their perspectives to our network. So I'm going to draw a lot upon what they've been sharing individually and collectively with us. So yes, the role of the finance leadership and team has changed. The three of us, can talk about an audit list or checklist of soft skills and hard skills needed today to navigate effectively and as part of the finance team or the finance leader of an enterprise. But at the core of what's needed today is an emphasis of understanding driven by data and information that finance now has real-time, confident access to, and then how you communicate and empower those across the enterprise to make decisions, and understanding that those decisions impact the customer experience and employee experience in your business, regardless of whether or not you are a B2C, a B2B, a publicly traded company, a private enterprise, a not-for-profit. That phenomena of data-driven decision-making and your ability to communicate effectively is at the core of everything that finance needs to be all about, and who needs to be in those seats.
Rob, is there thank you, Nick, for sharing that. I love that, how you set the stage for us. Rob, is there anything that caught your attention or you'd like to jump in there?
Well, one thing that Nick mentioned that definitely resonates with me is the idea of finance empowering the business decision makers, right? So finance is not on an island. Finance is not operating in a silo separate from the business. Finance really sees itself and really needs to be a partner to those business decision makers and help to empower them to really provide the data they need in a meaningful way, in a way that they can actually consume, because these are not necessarily finance specialists, but they need this very rich, very up-to-the-minute financial information to be able to make effective decisions. And so what we really are seeing is much more of a kind of key partnership between finance and the business.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's really moving finance from this kind of place of just traditional finance stewardship, right? Just focusing on just the financial data, just get the financial reporting out, but really looking more at the business as a whole, the enterprise as a whole, and looking at all the data that can be brought into that, I think, into that equation to share with the broader stakeholders.
Yeah, Ned, I think recognizing that regardless of experience level, title, role, or responsibility, the individuals both inside finance and outside finance have their own levels of comfort, competency, and confidence around data-driven decision making. And I think step one is recognizing that one size cannot fit all. Assumptions can't be made that when finance provides information that can be used, that it's ingested and applied with comfort and ease. The biggest source of change, I think, has been that regardless of whether or not we gather our finance leaders to talk about strategy, technology, risk, competitive environments, M&A, mergers and acquisitions, regardless of what we focus on bringing finance leaders to talk about, 90% of the time the discussion shifts to people. How do we interact, intersect, engage, educate, and empower people with data and information that they can, in a comfortable, efficient, and effective way, apply?
Yep, that's a valid point. Okay, so Rob, I want to go over to you now. So you've been working in the technology, working with technology in the software industry for over 15 years now. Most of that time has been designing software for accounting and finance. And over the course of that time, you've spoken with many customers. What has been the most surprising to you when you look at how customers are solving operational challenges today with systems and technology compared to the prior decade?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think what I would say is the most surprising to me in terms of how I've seen things change is that when you're building software for the finance function, that has historically been a very, very kind of conservative group. That's been typically a very conservative group in terms of taking a wait and see attitude with regard to any kind of newer technologies. It's typically not been the group that's the most gung-ho about going ahead and trying something new. It's been a pretty conservative group. And what we're seeing is that, finance is still obviously going to be conservative. Finance is still going to be 100% focused on getting the numbers right and on minimizing risk and on doing it all in a very kind of cost-conscious way. But at the same time, what we're seeing is much more of an embrace of some of the emerging technologies that are really kind of coming to in a kind of an early stage of maturation. And I'm talking about things like artificial intelligence and machine learning, where we are seeing finance very much almost at the forefront of saying, this is where we want to go. We see the benefit. We see how this is going to transform our function. We see how this is going to enable us to really do some of the things we already talked about in terms of empowering the business and in terms of really kind of driving strategy instead of just being a steward of financial transactions, as we said before. And so that's, I think, the biggest change that I've seen is that kind of embrace of emerging technologies that in the past has really not been where finance has played.
Hey, Rob, I can validate that with some data from the study we produced together with Workday and released in early 2020. The amount of time allocated to that finance plans to spend directly interacting with the customer experience and directly with the employee experience beyond just their own team is skyrocketing in terms of the number of finance leaders who say, now more than ever, I see the role of finance becoming embedded in decision-making across the enterprise. And that embedded is not hidden anymore. It is directly in front of the customer experience and the employee experience. So, I'm curious, that comfort level that you talk about and that maybe that earlier in time resistance that they've had to embrace different technologies, different solutions? Do you think it's directly tied to the fact that, they have a comfort with numbers and data and basis as a concept, and now it's being brought to colleagues across the enterprise, both internally and externally, more frequently, more real time, and with greater confidence in that data as well, that it could really impact decision making?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think you're probably right that is, this is an area where I think finance sees some of these emerging technologies really kind of playing in their wheelhouse, right? It's not just some kind of, whiz bang toy.
Right.
It really is about, helping to harness the power of data, which is really what finance has always been all about, right? So I think from that perspective, it's maybe not such a change for them, right? It's maybe a little bit more of a natural evolution. So I think there is something to that.
Yeah.
So this is a great transition to my next question, Nick. So we've talked about focusing on being more data driven, empowering more stakeholders with deeper insight, investing in business intelligence technology. These have all been top of mind for finance leaders actually for many years. And in 2020 and going forward isn't any different. I think it's now becoming a necessity, not a nice to have or a luxury. So I want to look at two different aspects around insight. Let's first start with the skills or the talent needed in 2020. Your sentiment study talked about the risks associated with the inability to find talent needed to stay competitive in 2020. And now in the environment that they're in, I think that we're in, I think that that's amplified. So can you elaborate a bit?
Sure. I mean, the visual that's taken stake and hold, that's emphasized in the sentiment study that we released with Workday, really hones in on the fact that careers right now are moving from ladder-driven to lattice-driven. You have this movement and intersections and series of pivots that the entire workforce is embracing. With the complexity of a diverse demographic, we no longer can view career pathing as a straight line, and I think finance is living that. That impacts the supply of talent, the expectation of talent, and ultimately, I think for a lot of finance leaders, opens this up to looking at who could be the most impactful on their team a bit differently, from both a technical skill set and soft skill set. So if I had to hone in on a couple of key areas, we're living in a world where scenario planning is now by the hour, by the day, by the week, by the moment. But both of you know that takes a very specific type of person and DNA to approach that and be comfortable with it. And I think that's really what the rest of the enterprise and the employee base and the customers are expecting from finance. That you're comfortable to say, okay, we understand that we have a variety of different swim lanes that we could potentially go down. What's driving, what's feeding those lanes, and how comfortable are we that the data and information that we have is validated, and we're comfortable with it and can be used to make decisions. So I think there's a mix of technical skills and talents, financial planning and analysis, those skills critical. And I think a soft skill that says, okay, I followed a logic, I followed a reasoning, I followed a process, and I understand the logic behind the technology I'm using as well to provide me with that, and I'm confident. And then I can interpret it for you in a language that you're most comfortable in as well, meaning don't give me a spreadsheet with formulas. Give me an image, give me a word, give me a heat map, give me a temperature, but make sure the data behind it can be trusted.
Yep. I think that's, I kind of look at, I see two things. One is a shift from accounting becoming more FP&A-like, right? Becoming more analytic. And I anticipate we will see fewer people in accounting than we've traditionally seen in the past. And I think we'll see the finance organization that what we refer to as FP&A actually increase. I think we still need the accountants. We still need the folks that the CPAs close the books. They need the, making sure that we're doing, meeting with the compliance needs, et cetera. But I definitely see that shift. But I think that the folks that are in accounting today should embrace the opportunity that's in front of them, because this is career building, right? And I loved your image of the lattice more than the ladder, because it's not just about staying in the same track and just moving up. It's by adding analytic skills, by adding machine learning skills, by adding how to understand data, how to interpret data, how data tells a story, and how to communicate that out to stakeholders. Those are all going to be skills that are being sought after now, but they're going to become considered table stakes for accounting professionals going forward. So I love that. So the second aspect of insight is related to technology, obviously, which is, obviously there's a really close tie to talent. You can have the best technology, but if finance doesn't know how to use it, doesn't have the data literacy to interpret the data, it's useless. So Rob, reporting analysis, we know how much that is near and dear and is critical component to any financial management system, and to the office, and to the accounting folks in particular, and actually all finance professionals. So how does access to more than just financial information enable finance to be more strategic and be an overall better partner to the business? We started to allude to this. You mentioned this when you opened, but I'd love to kind of have you elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, what we typically see is that, in order to really kind of have all of the relevant information that's needed to make important business decisions, it's not just coming from finance, right? There's, depending on the industry, depending on the environment that a company is operating in, data may be coming from a wide variety of different sources, a wide, variety of kind of granularity, the kind of level of data that's involved. But ultimately, the people who are going to be able to win in that environment are the ones who are able to kind of synthesize data from across a wide variety of sources, right? It's about being able to kind of tie these things together, being able to really kind of unify and standardize data so that you're not having kind of, operational details in a very siloed way separated from perhaps higher level financial information. And so again, it's going to vary by industry. It's going to vary by the way that a company operates. But one of the most kind of fundamental things that a company can really do is take a very holistic view across its entire data footprint and really understand, what is relevant here? What are the linkages between these things? And how do they really kind of unify a view across all of these different information sources? It's not easy, right? I mean, it's not easy, because again, you've got different granularity, you've got different levels of access, and of course, you've just got lots of, possibly systems that are, spaghetti wired together, and that can become very difficult, right? And so that's one of the kind of most fundamental ways that we see that, companies that have a very, again, kind of holistic and kind of unifying view across their information sources are going to be much better positioned to be able to drive great decision making.
Can I throw a question out there to Rob along those lines? I mean, so much of what we talk about in our networks with our finance leaders is about this concept of basis. Basis was something that was taught in accounting and finance principles 101. But what we're hearing and seeing from our finance leaders is that basis now cannot be isolated and explained solely as a quantitative term. That the technology that is now providing us real-time, accurate, confident information around the qualitative is also a component in this. Be that characteristics around and projections and a forward thinking around customer behaviors and expectations, employee expectations, competitive or system-driven activities. I guess part of what I'm wondering is, how do you help them, how to help people prioritize and get comfortable with and then communicate with all of that in mind? I mean, I actually think, Annette, to your point, I think it used to be simple. Do they understand debits, credits, historic look back, macroeconomic terms tied to accounting principles and foundations and financial reporting standards? And now their finance is being asked to help provide guidance on with predictive information and the like. So I'm curious from your lens, Rob, you know, how are you counseling people to get comfortable with that?
Yeah, it's a great point, because once you start pulling in some of these qualitative sources, you're introducing uncertainty, right? You're introducing, there's a level of, you know, I don't want to say lack of precision, but obviously, you know, by definition, it's going to be a little bit less precise, a little bit less kind of scientific, a little bit more judgment involved, right?
Yes.
And that's important. You don't want to lose that. That's incredibly valuable information, but at the same time, it has to be understood, you know, to what degree you can be certain about things, to what degree you can, you know, infer things. And so it's an interesting challenge. And, you know, maybe I can give a kind of example from my own personal work where, you know, as Annette said, I've been, you know, building software for 15 plus years. And we'll have staff meetings where we're looking at, you know, things relating to software development. We're looking at bug counts. We're looking at, you know, how many features we put out. We now have our finance business partner in those staff meetings. That's not something that we had in the past, right? And so when we're, you know, week by week, when we're looking at, you know, here's what we're working toward, here's what we're building toward, we are having our finance business partner as part of that discussion to help us make sense of what we're reporting, right? And so I think where we really see the significant value is that we are able to bring a lot of that qualitative information, and what we're seeing is that by partnering with finance, we're better able to make sense of what does this really mean, how seriously can we take this, how much do we need to allow for a fudge factor, and, you know, to what degree should we be driving decisions off of this? And what we've actually seen is that I think by bringing that kind of finance lens into things, we're taking this data a little more seriously than we would have in the past. I think in the past, we would have been more quick to, oh, well, whatever, that's anecdotal, right? We can't take it that seriously. And I think having that finance lens is actually helping us move in more of the direction we want to go, which is to see it as a valuable information source and to really try to, you know, couple it with some of the more kind of hard numbers that we traditionally associate with finance.
So you see that intersection of instinct plus intuition plus the data really coming together, and that's not just a finance phenomena. That's you're seeing that maybe what's been driving finance moving across the enterprise in terms of the people involved in those other areas as well.
That's exactly right.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think, and I would like to add something. Something an analyst shared with me over this past year, which was a little bit of an eye opener for me, but I think that it's directly connected here. How many finance practitioners have spent any time in the business, in the operations of the business, right? They sit in their office, they sit in their department, and Rob's example was spot on, but the more finance practitioners and, you know, accounting and FP&A, all finance practitioners get out of their world and get into the operations of business, the more they're going to understand what's actually going on and understand how the business runs and how the business operates. And then I think when you come back, Nick, what you just said around the intuition and the judgment, they have a feel for what's going on in the organization, and now they can look at the numbers, and I think that there's a better complement. I think in the past, I think that sometimes they might have solely focused on the numbers, or they solely focused on their instincts, and there wasn't this probably marrying of these two things. So this is
yeah, Nat, your visual is so stimulating because I have a real-time movement occurring in our CFO Alliance network. We actually talked about sending newly seated CFOs in the mail a wrench and or screwdriver with a note that says, take the door off the hinges, because you need to be out and in and visible and in an authentic way that you're comfortable with, working in the business while working on the numbers that are on the business or about the business. And so I think you're dead on, Annette, with that. That's the real sense of opportunity, empowerment, and accelerator for finance being viewed not as a siloed concept, but as the driver for decision-making across the enterprise, and maybe collectively, as Rob was putting at it, a we equation This isn't finance's number. These aren't finance numbers. These are your numbers. Or this isn't, technology isn't for us. It's to empower you, to get them to embrace the we as I think the real movement that needs to happen. And I think many finance leaders are embracing.
Yeah. And I think that this is great. There's a great example, I think, with every industry, right? Because the more you understand the number of patients, your healthcare, number of patients, number of beds, right? Hospitality, you know, number of hotel rooms, number of restaurants, whatever, number of stores, all of these things, you take that data and now you're blending that, and people can now start seeing things that they've never even seen before, or it was just kind of relegated over to another group that basically did that type of stuff. But the more accounting and finance have an understanding of, oh, well, number of, patrons that visited restaurants was up, but, revenue was down or whatever, and you start seeing patterns and trends, you're now starting to be able to see what we call the why behind the what, and what is the story that's, what's the reason for some of these things, getting down to a very granular level on why some of these things are happening or occurring. Then they can start, whether, going to do the scenario modeling that you mentioned, right? And now predicting more accurately, forecasting more accurately what they might want to see happen, and they have more control over it. They're not just looking in the rearview mirror going, oh, well, that month passed and that quarter passed and we couldn't do anything about it. But now we're in a place where you need to, in the moment, make decisions, but you need the right data and you need that insight. So love the discussion. But I want to go on to another topic that I think is that's just as interesting. Nick, your study points to the lack of leadership and change management skills as some of the top skills gaps, and that finance and HR both must address in their teams. Embracing technology and creating more data-driven decision-making, creating a more decision-making culture all require change. We've been talking about it and how it's a different. There's been a great deal of discussion out there about upskilling finance related to the digital and disruptive technologies. We've been talking about that. But leadership and change management skills are so critical to the success of any initiative when adopting something new. My husband does a lot of agile transformations, and one of the things of doing any agile type initiative really requires alignment, but across the entire organization, but buy-in and leadership from the top to make these successful. So what insights or recommendations would you give to finance organizations when it comes to embracing change management and really making sure that leadership is involved?
Well, I think that a few things. First of all, we're living in a world where we're all personally and professionally have to embrace change management as a principle and foundation for our individual and collective influence and our own activities in our households and our workplaces, internally and externally with who we serve. So I think part of it is we can take a deep breath and say, oh my goodness, they're not asking me to take on something I've never applied before, but maybe emphasize something that needs to be applied in this day and age, given the rapid pace of change and human beings' lack of discomfort with inconsistency. That's what we don't like. Finance loves consistency. That may be in the reason why we went there to begin with. But at the same time, we're now realizing, because of access to technology-driven innovations and changes, our business strategies, our competitive matrices, our employee experiences, and our customer experiences are changing at a rapid pace. So we've had to embrace this want for consistency with demonstrated comfort with change at the same time. And so I think that Rob kind of hit on it without saying it. Well, a lot of what he and his teams are doing or attempting to do is empower individuals in finance to be story doers, right? Here's the story that you can deliver. Now, think about when you're telling a story, you have to play to different audiences and their own sense of what story doing requires. As you can see, I'm probably not best for audio or video because I move around a lot. I'm very animated. So if I'm going to be told a story, I want an animated storyteller. Finance wants consistency, which means they don't want to see the shirt change magically in 30 seconds because they're going to wonder, what is that all about? I'm losing faith and confidence in what it is he or she is saying. And HR is looking at the reaction of everybody else on the tiles. How is Rob feeling about what Annette's saying? and or what I'm saying, right? So I think that we have to think from a change management standpoint. Do we have understanding, but are we communicating effectively with, and is that message sticking and or comfortably resonating with who we're trying to deliver it to? That's the real sense of opportunity. And that's complex, but it also kind of simple too, right? Let's peel it back and let's say, okay, I know what my intention was, but was the perception the reality? Did it stick? And if it didn't, don't move on until it does, right?
Yep. Yep. The whole change management thing is, it's I think the customers want, and I think we see many organizations want to change, but it's amazing that they either don't have the construct, that ability to manage that change, and it's a little bit of a head scratcher for me because change management is not something new. No. But again, I think looking at finance organizations and accounting people, I'm one of them, risk averse, don't like a lot of change, and like things like, as you mentioned, consistent, and to stay the same and to be known, right? To be not predictable. But it still is something that I think is so important, and I think for projects to be successful, it is an absolute necessity, and organizations need to be looking closer at that. Yeah. So we've discussed how technology is impacting the finance function, the importance of data-driven decision-making, is how important that is to an enterprise, how finance also not only needs to look at not only skills gap, but also leadership and change management. So I'd like to come back to something that I kicked off the session with today, and I mentioned the long-term survival of any organization is its ability to manage the unexpected, and this couldn't be more applicable to where we are today. So, Rob, I want to start with you and ask you, what advice or recommendations would you give to finance organizations in 2020, and also in the future when it comes to becoming more agile to really enable them to weather disruption? Of any kind, small, medium, or large?
Yeah, it's so interesting question. I think I'd go back to one of the things that Nick mentioned before, just about some of the changing skills that we're seeing becoming more and more critical in finance departments, including more soft skills, which is perhaps not what was historically really thought of as the kind of as a key enabler in finance departments, but is really fundamental to helping organizations to really be more agile. And so I think as we start to see finance departments starting to add more soft skills and more kind of a variety of skills around things like data scientists and other roles that haven't really historically been part of the finance department, I think that'll start to help, because really, we talked before about scenario planning. We've talked about kind of the importance of projections, of being able to kind of experiment with different drivers and kind of understand what impacts things are going to happen, and that's really, really fundamental, right? It's really important, I think, for organizations to have a good sense on what are the key drivers of their business, what happens when things change, and to be able to kind of model out those scenarios. You're never going to get it right. You're never going to necessarily predict exactly what's going to happen, but by going through the work of planning it out, understanding what things are going to look like given certain changes, it makes you that much better equipped to deal with the actual changes that happen. It may not be the same thing, but by kind of building up that muscle for reacting to change and for being able to understand what's going to happen and what change is going to result in what change over here, that I think is what really enables you to be agile and to be able to responsive when things really do change in unexpected ways.
Yeah, I love that muscle memory metaphor, because I think that is so key, that once you go through it a few times, I think it also loses its maybe fear factor, or it's, that it's, the fear of the unknown, that it starts, wait a minute, we can do this. We can do this. We've got the technology. Sounds like $6 million man. So Nick, and kind of over to you, what key actions or takeaways would you give to finance organizations based on your latest study? Because your latest study obviously was done in 2019, looking into 2020. But now, in light of where we are today, is there anything that you would you would emphasize, re-emphasize, or that you would add to based on what you know today?
Yeah, I would say that, and Rob kind of touched on it. I think one of the opportunities finance has to navigate an environment that it feels increasingly at a rapid pace, moving and changing, and a series of ups and downs. I think that given advancements in technology that now provide finance with information, that scenario planning no longer can be viewed as should be viewed as an exercise of what if, but what can and what are. And I think that what we've done is compress the amount of options or swim lanes that can be planned for, and also provided an opportunity for some predictability to say, okay, what's likely, and can empower finance to articulate and either reinforce a decision, challenge a decision that can be made, and feel like that they've got a foundation for it. So I remember I was thinking about scenario planning, a decade ago, and that was kind of like, let me go off into my office and let me kind of begin to model something, right? How many times did you hear that? Like, I'll model that out. I actually think that now, given advancements of technology and changes in the way people view their role in it, modeling it out means I think we've got three options in front of us. I've analyzed the probability and the certainty and the impact of taking one of those three paths, and I suggest we go down this path. Or what do you think? And I'll have an opinion based upon information and analysis that I feel comfortable with and for. And that used to be a look back. And now, to your point, Annette, that you raised earlier, and Rob, the point level of comfort that you're trying to bring, this can be applied to current state and potential future state with a higher level of confidence than ever before.
Yep. And I also envision a world where technology will actually be able to make that prediction of those three scenarios, which one you should go forward with based on either, based on historical results, based on trends, based on patterns. And again, it's kind of the technology that's out there can analyze and understand and interpret things that the human brain, or no amount, what I refer to as spreadsheet gymnastics, right, can do for us. So I envision a world where you'll be presented with three that you have to pick. You'll be presented with three, and the system's going to pick which one that is the best recommendation to move forward with. So, I was
just going to say, I heard that firsthand. We're living in a consumer-driven world. Like, I love this. Used to be, well, that's a business to consumer phenomena. I'm sorry, regardless of product, service, end user, everything has become socially enabled and consumer-driven, right? How does it feel at the end of the day still matters. And I think that, a lot of what we looked at in terms of consumer behaviors, we were like, we didn't think we could apply to the B2B world. And now we can, to your point. Now it can be much more predictive. Here's how they'll react and they'll respond, or here's how they'll reject and or push back.
Yep. Yeah, you're mentioning on something that we could go head down a whole nother path on the whole focus on the customer, right? Because finance traditionally hasn't really had a view of customer data, customer analysis, customer sentiment, right, to inform how they view things, and to and look at, and I think that we look at customer satisfaction, and we look at customer adoption, and you look at all those things related to customer, and how often, everything we have today almost has a review from customers on their feedback, and how much more important that's becoming, that finance needs to be bringing that into their equation, probably more so than they have. And again, that could create a whole nother topic for us for a whole nother conversation. But I could go on and on. I love chatting with both of you today. Thank you both for sharing your viewpoints with not only me, but with our audience today. Really, really appreciate your time, and hope you all join us again next month for the next episode of Workday Chats. Thanks, and all stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll look forward to next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.